I'm Chris Sumner. Some of you know me as Suggy, some of you don't know me at all. Hello. The talk is about psychographic targeting that's using sort of psychology, behavioral markers in political campaigns. And the talk I gave at DEF CON was called Rage Against the Weaponized AI Propaganda Machine. I'll talk about why I chose that title in a few minutes. So I'm representing a small organization called the Online Privacy Foundation. We're a group of volunteers, and we do research into psychology, behavior, generally in online contexts, but as it also influences online contexts. So in 2016, in the UK, which is where I'm from, we had this thing, which you may know more commonly as Brexit. And I was kind of wondering why there were these differences in people, or apparent differences in people. And my wife said, well, rather than bitching about it, why don't you do something about it? And I was like, well, that's interesting. I'd love to study this a little bit more. So we did a large research project looking at personality, numeracy, thinking styles, and susceptibility to cognitive biases with over 11,000 people across like 5 months of different studies. So we're currently working with a university in the US to finish writing that up. One of the questions that we put in that research was this one. If you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear. And we wanted to see how the people who voted for Brexit and voted to remain in the EU, how they differed. And here what we can see is kind of across the sexes and the age groups, we have a difference in the people that agree with that statement. We see that people who voted to leave were much more likely to agree with that if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear argument. So what we were going to do, we were going to do a talk, or we were going to submit a talk to DEF CON that was really looking at, okay, authoritarianism, nothing to hide, what does this mean for privacy? But then in around January, I saw this article, which is where I got the title from the talk from, The Rise of the Weaponized AI Propaganda Machine, which was suggesting that companies like Cambridge Analytica, and there was another company, a Canadian company, actually, I think, Aggregate IQ, there you go, had used like behavioral targeting, micro-targeting on Facebook to reach different audiences and kind of sway them to vote one way or the other. So when that article came out, I had a few friends contact me and say, like, is this legit? Can it happen? Does it work? Because I've done some research into that sort of caper before. And then there was this article came out as well, which was like, does it hold water? So there's more people beginning to say, yeah, is this just like, bitching by the left, or does it actually work? So previously, we'd done some research that's looked at susceptibility to social bots on Twitter. That's back in 2013, where we looked at who we could target on Twitter and whether they'd respond and how to target them more effectively, get a bigger bang for your buck, essentially. 2011 and 2012, we'd looked at personality in relation to Facebook usage. And in 2012, we looked at the same kind of study, but on Twitter. And we looked at dark triad traits with psychopathy, narcissism, and stuff like that, looking at the language people use and their behavior on social media. So we've got a little bit of background in this, and this was kind of, this study now is kind of like the phase 2 after the Brexit paper. So in order to answer the question of does it hold water, we wanted to take a kind of a different context, but explore that. So we used, this could be the sort of the more academic title, if you like, using attitudes to online surveillance to explore the efficacy of psychographic marketing in political campaigns. The non-academic term is, does this shit work? So we broke the study down into 5 different distinct studies. The first one is like, why are people so divided? The second is, well, if they are divided, kind of what influences people? Otherwise, the divisions would be rather static, and they're not. So something's influencing people one way or the other. What is that? And then we look at, what is the effectiveness of actually trying to target these different groups individually? How effective is that going to be? And then if you can target them, how can you persuade them if you like to adopt one position politically or a different position politically. And then finally, we look at, well, okay, if this stuff gets out there and people are reading it, how difficult is it to debunk, if you like, propaganda? So for the first one, why are people so divided? Well, we looked at online attitudes to online surveillance, but we could have chosen the death penalty. We could have chosen same-sex marriage or relationships even. We could have chosen immigration. This was a poster that one of the Leave campaigns used in the EU referendum, the Brexit referendum. And what it is essentially is that people are influenced by this trait here this disposition rather, called authoritarianism. However, if you're looking at the news, you might be forgiven for thinking that the kind of society is split into two distinct groups, snowflakes and deplorables, and there's nothing in the middle. Whereas actually it's a lot different to that. And we see it kind of skewed where we've got more people towards the lower end of authoritarianism, and it's kind of this kind of non-normal distribution, if you like. So let me explain just a little bit about what authoritarianism is. And also say that researchers have been trying to look for different ways of describing authoritarianism because the term alone can cause some frustrations. So people who are higher in authoritarianism tend to see the world in like black and white, tend to, it's not always. And people on the low end of authoritarianism up to the lower end see it in shades of grey, so more ambiguity, if you like. People higher in authoritarianism tend to value tradition more versus people who are lower in authoritarianism who are more into embracing new ideas, new cultures, and Footloose was kind of a neat film once. It still is. People higher in authoritarianism tend to be less accepting of people that outside their groups. So versus people who are low in authoritarianism who are much more accepting of different groups, different cultures, and what have you. So one of the ways of looking at authoritarianism, or one of the more commonly ways of looking for this, is a barrage of questions. Actually, it's only 4, so not really a barrage, by these guys, Feldman and Stenner, in 1997. They came up with essentially 4 questions that help measure authoritarianism, and they're essentially these questions. So what's most important for a child to have? Self-reliance versus obedience, curiosity, good manners, independence, respect for elders. If you answer more questions on the right-hand side, you tend to be higher in authoritarianism versus the questions that are like self-reliance, curiosity, independence. So you select one or the other. It's binary. It's not like a scale. So that gives you actually a pretty reliable method of looking at authoritarianism without asking too many questions. So we use that throughout these studies. So breaking down our research, what we did here is, I'll just present quickly sort of the study and the results. We actually ran 4 studies looking at these attitudes to online surveillance, and you'll see that they're like A1 and A2 and B1 and B2. There's a slight difference between them in that in B1 we added some numerical questions, or B1 and B2 we added some numerical questions, and the A studies were purely questions and text about people's opinions. So the questions we asked 5 questions. The first one was, you have nothing to hide if you have nothing to fear, and people had to agree or disagree. There was nothing in the middle. It was purely binary, because we replicated some previous research in this area. So we wanted to be able to see whether we were able to see the same results that the prior scholars had found, namely Mark Hetherington and Elizabeth Suhay, if people are interested. There's plenty of notes in here, by the way. The next question we asked is, it is acceptable that law enforcement agencies have the right to access the content of their citizens' online communications without a warrant in order to investigate terrorism. The third question was, it's acceptable that immigrants and visitors from potentially dangerous countries should have to reveal their social media accounts to UK border agents. I should say that the study was given to the UK, but you can try this in Canada as well. Be interesting. This one, you might think, I'm nuts, but we actually took this from CIGI Ipsos Global Survey on Internet Security and Trust. And simply the question was, the darknet should be shut down. Agree or disagree? I'm not quite sure how you do that, but I do actually have some thoughts. But then the final question we asked was, companies should not be allowed to develop technologies that prevent law enforcement from accessing your online conversations. So that came from that same Ipsos global survey. So again, these are the surveys we ran, the rough number of people we had. But one thing happened in March of this year is that we had if you like, the first terrorist attack of the year in London occurred then. So we had to look at the way that affected the results of the study, and that's why we kind of broken them up into 4 separate studies. So what we look at is comparing like for like the A1 and A2 studies pre and post. We see that, yeah, there was a significant, weakly significant difference in the question on, if you like, banning anti-surveillance technology, the last question, but everything else was roughly the same. I draw your attention, though, to shutting down the darknet. That's got quite a bit of support by the looks of things. Onto surveys B1 and B2, what we found is there were no real differences, actually, between post and pre-terrorist attacks. So we were able to do some grouping of the questions based on those differences. So essentially, for the nothing to hide, nothing to fear argument, what we see here is that people who agree with that statement are much higher in authoritarianism, both pre-attack, post-attack, and you can kind of see those results there. In fact, if we look at all of the questions, then we see the same thing across wiretapping, shut down the darknet, extreme vetting, and that's like revealing your social media passwords at border agents, and then banning anti-surveillance technology. So there's clear differences, and I can assure you that there's also clear differences between the different age groups as well. So that's the first thing. We see that people have got clear differences in opinions to their attitudes to online surveillance, and it's drawn around this sort of authoritarian divide, which has been written about a lot. So if we know that those differences are there in people, what can influence their views? Well, there's been some research in this area already, and what we can see is that essentially the probability of support for surveillance. Generally, if you're low in authoritarianism, it's fairly unlikely that you're going to support it. And if you're high in authoritarianism, you probably are going to support it and go, yeah, it probably needs to be done. And that's kind of your baseline. So there's 2 arguments. One suggests here that as the threat increases, or the perception of the threat increases, people who are higher in authoritarianism will increase their support for those kinds of policies, supporting support for surveillance. The other theory is that actually it's kind of the reverse of that. The support increases among people who are lower in authoritarianism. And that's been found by Hetherington and Suhey in a paper in 2011. There's another piece of research which also came out in 2011, which suggested that both of those papers or theories were somehow correct or partially right, and that it's anger and anxiety that are the motivating factors. So people higher in authoritarianism, anger is going to motivate them. So if you piss them off about terrorism, surveillance, what have you, their support for it is going to go up. And the fear element in people who are low in authoritarianism is going to have kind of a higher effect. So that's kind of the theory and where that's going at the moment. So for what we did in this second study, essentially, we replicated the work that Hetherington and Suhey had done in 2011. And their question was, essentially, you added a question into the surveys, which was, how worried are you that you personally might become a victim of a terrorist attack? And you essentially had, from not worried at all to very worried, which we just labeled here as low, medium, high, and very high. So what we did essentially is do exactly what Hetherington did, which was use a logistic regression, to use a statistical term. And we've got authoritarianism coded along the bottom and the probability on the top. So this is what Hetherington found. It's just a picture of the book. Here they found that as people lower in authoritarianism, if they were concerned about being a victim of a terrorist attack, their support for wiretapping in this case rose from like 25% probability of supporting it to a 75%-ish probability. But there wasn't that much difference in those people who were high. So what we found was sort of similar, actually. People who were worried about it, their support increased quite dramatically, whereas people who were high in authoritarianism or higher in authoritarianism, the probability of support didn't change as much. And we saw that fairly repeatedly across each of the different studies, with the exception of extreme vetting. Not quite sure what's going on in the extreme vetting graph, but I draw your attention to the Shut Down the Darknet one, where there was a lot of support to begin with, and if people were worried about the threat of terrorism or being involved in it, then their support went up. And I guess that's because they're not really familiar with exactly what the sort of darknet is and who is. So that's kind of worrying, because governments could look at that and say, well, there's already a lot of support for that. We can double down on that strategy and it'll be a vote winner. So what's influencing these people, it's not just that anger and anxiety, but those are at least likely candidates for exploring in a little bit more depth. So the third study was, okay, well, we know how people differ and how maybe we can nudge them one way or the other, possibly using anger and anxiety, but how effective are we at actually targeting these different groups? So there's been like loads of research into looking at the relationship between Facebook, Twitter activity and whatnot and personality. So, you've got your age, sex, geography, Facebook interests, and out comes, your personality traits. What we essentially want to do is do that the other way around. So pipe the personality variable in and get like, these are the different ad markets we want to target on Facebook. So essentially, low authoritarianism, high authoritarianism, we want to take those characteristics, pop them through a function and go, well, low authoritarianisms are made up of these age groups, sexes, places where they live, and their Facebook interests. So the way we approached this study, essentially we looked at each of those four variables. So for age and sex, we looked at the results from our EU referendum paper, and essentially for females here in the 18 to 35 category, there were very, very few that voted for leave. So that influenced how we were going to target the different groups. Whereas for males, there were clear differences, and for older females, there were kind of clear differences between leave and remain along authoritarianism. So for our Facebook target categories, we essentially have the low authoritarian group. We're going to just go for males of any age group, and females under 35 might be a safe bet. And for high authoritarianisms, males again of any age, because there's nothing much to divide them, and females over 35 and over might be a safe bet. So that's one target group. The next is what we want to do is look at geography. And there's been papers, this is by Renfro and co from Cambridge University. They looked at personality across 380 local area districts in the UK. They did this with the US as well, over states. I've not found a similar thing for Canada. That would be interesting to look at. And what this ocean is at the bottom, essentially, is personality, the big 5 personality traits of openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, which you'll sometimes hear called emotional stability. Well, there's been quite a lot of study into authoritarianism and the big 5 of personality, and essentially it looks a little bit like this. So people who are lower in authoritarianism, people who are, let me start again. People who are high in authoritarianism tend to have higher degrees of conscientiousness and lower degrees of openness. So openness is associated with like creativity and stuff like that. So your authoritarians are less, if you like, less creative as a group, not individuals, I should say. And the conscientiousness is related to kind of tradition and those kinds of things that we've already looked at. There wasn't a great deal of difference between extroversion and agreeableness, but for neuroticism, that's kind of related to openness as well, because the theory is that people live in a more nebulous world, therefore a more stressful world, and therefore, there's a little bit higher neuroticism. So what we did, we took the results from Renfro's paper, and we kind of plot them on this graph here with openness, which we reverse, and conscientiousness, because openness and conscientiousness are pretty good indicators of authoritarianism. Then we took all of the vote data from the Brexit campaign, and we plotted it on a graph like that. Well, we plotted it on this graph, not a graph like this one. And essentially what you can see to the top right hand of the screen, is the sort of the high authoritarian groups. These are the local area districts in the UK that are predicted based on personality to be higher in authoritarianism, and those to the bottom left are lower in authoritarianism. I'll explain kind of actually what we did is we ran some machine learning against it to just see how predictive it would be. I'll talk more about that in a second. So what we wanted to do was pick 5 or so towns that we'd be pretty happy with being in the low authoritarian category, and 5 or so towns that would be in the high authoritarian category. And essentially what we found is low authoritarian are towns and cities that probably most of you have heard of: Cambridge, Liverpool, Manchester, Edinburgh, and my favourite was Hackney, because it's a hacker conference, right? That was actually the least authoritarian local area district in the UK. So that's pretty sweet. And then high authoritarianism, these are towns that you're less likely to have heard of, I would suggest, unless you like the game The Amazing Frog, in which case you've heard of Swindon, right? So like 3 people will get that, but I'm a big Pungence fan. So I talked about the predictiveness of this. We didn't do anything fancy. We just used a simple logistic regression with openness and conscientiousness, and we found it was pretty good at classifying which areas were going to vote for Brexit and which weren't. So geography, we know now that we can go to these towns and we'll pipe these into our Facebook target audiences, along with the age and sex data. Then we get to Facebook interests, and this is a tool that's available to researchers, but not the general public as such, by Michael Kosinski and folks like that who are at Cambridge, although Kosinski's at Stanford now, I believe. And essentially what this lets you do is use these slider bars to say, well, this is the sort of the personality profile I'm going for. I want you to spit out the sorts of Facebook interests that people with this personality sort of shape would go for. And you can put in more information about that. What we did, we kept it pretty simple because we're doing an initial study into this, not the next level of involvement. So we just used what the Facebook interests will actually roll up into liberalism and conservatism. So, we'll put those in. And then we chose 2 of the newspapers that are widely read in the UK, which are The Guardian for the lower authoritarian category and the Mail Online for the higher authoritarian category. So for our baseline, these are the percentage of people who agree with the nothing to hide, nothing to fear argument, about 38%. If we just look at the age, sex, and location data, if we target the low authoritarian group, or who we think to, we see the drop go from 38 to 32, not statistically significant, but still, if you're looking at getting a bang for your buck through ads, then it kind of works. And for the high authoritarian group, we see that go from 38 to 46. But when we add the behavioral information in the liberalism and the newspaper, and that's all we chose at this point, we didn't go more granular, we see that starts to become significant and drops from 38 to 25%. Whereas if we go for the high authoritarian group, we have a pretty highly significant difference of 38 to 61. So now we can target those groups. Those are the high authoritarianism group, with messages that are going to start resonating with them. So not only do we know that there are differences and potentially how we might manipulate them, but we also know that the targeting seems to actually give us a bang for the buck in terms of ads. So, okay, the next question then is, well, how persuasive are targeted ads? Well, to use the words of Alexander Nix, the CEO of Cambridge Analytica, he said, if you know the personality of the people you're targeting, you can nuance your messaging to resonate more effectively with those key audience groups. So don't take my word for it, right? So there's been a study from this by some folks from over the other side of Canada, actually, I think in Calgary, Hirsch, Kang, Bodenhausen. They conducted a study in 2012, looked at personality in relation to mobile phone ads. So they created 5 distinct ads for each of the 5 personality traits. And this one was for extroversion. So with X phone, you'll always be where the excitement is, party, right? You don't want to miss it. And the next personality trait here was stay safe and secure with X phone. That was for neuroticism. And what they found was that these did correlate with people's personality traits. So, they suggested that you'd get some bang for the buck in targeting people with these sorts of ads. Next, we've got researchers from Cambridge again, Matt, Popov, Kaczynski, and Stilwell. They created ads for the same beauty product, one aimed at introverts, one aimed at extroverts, as you can see here. And they found that the ads targeted at the various groups performed as they would have expected, essentially. So the ads targeted at the introvert group had more clicks from people who were in the introverted category. And they did another study following on from there with Hilton hotel brands to look at using that for getting people to choose their vacation. So it's pretty interesting stuff, and you can Google away with that. So for our study, what we did is we wanted to take ads and aim them at the high authoritarian group and the low authoritarian group. But we wanted to look at a pro and an anti-surveillance agenda, essentially. So we created 4 ads. For the pro ad, it's like terrorists don't let them hide online, using a picture of 9/11. For the low authoritarians that we want to sort of nudge into a pro-surveillance support, we actually try and suggest that crime doesn't stop where the internet starts and look at all of the crimes that happen and not just focusing on terrorism. For the low authoritarian group who we want to keep in a anti-surveillance support, we have this picture of Anne Frank with, do you really have nothing to fear if you've got nothing to hide? And then for the high authoritarian group, based on their affinity for military and tradition and respect for elders, we've got, they fought for your freedom, don't give it away. So we measure it in this way. We've got, first of all, we presented all of the ads to all participants, and then we looked at the correlation between how much people liked the ads versus their levels of authoritarianism. So we broke that self-reported levels down to low, medium, high authoritarianism, and then the amount that people found the ads persuasive through 5 questions, which replicated the Bodenhausen study. We look at that. So for the don't let terrorists hide online questions, we see that it's got more support from people high in authoritarianism, as we'd expect, and less support from people lower. Where we see the ads based on the crime doesn't stop where the internet starts, we see actually that you've got you've got the same level of support-ish for the high authoritarianisms, but now you're bringing up the low and the medium in terms of how much they like the ad or say they do. And then for the low authoritarian group, we see that low authoritarians like the nothing to fear, nothing to hide Anne Frank ad, whereas the high authoritarians don't so much. But what we saw, which was surprising, was the ad that was meant to pull up the high and medium authoritarian group, which it does, also appealed to the people who were low in authoritarianism. So that was pretty interesting to see. So we see that the ads do resonate with these different groups, but we wanted to then go, the next step and essentially test that out online, look at the efficacy of that. So we used the audiences that we'd found from the previous study, where we had the different age, sex, Facebook interests and what have you, that we were able to target with these different ads. Essentially, we've got those different audiences listed against this axis, and then we've got the ratio here of likes to shares by the reach of the ad. So what we see here is that it wasn't an ad; it was a boosted Facebook post, just a little difference. So we see that the people in the high authoritarian group really kind of like that ad and will click through it pretty happily, but people lower in authoritarianism aren't going to click so much on that ad or that boosted post. What we see here with the low authoritarian group is that the ad kind of bombed. And Facebook warned us about that because it said, you've got a lot of text in this ad. Essentially paraphrasing, it said ads with a lot of text suck and people aren't going to click on them. So that's kind of a lesson learned. But what is interesting is that the correlation coefficient kind of got lower. So if we get the ad right, presumably we'll be able to bring up, people who are in the low authoritarian category. That needs more research, clearly. For looking at people clicking onto the anti-surveillance ads with the nothing to fear, nothing to hide Anne Frank ad, we see kind of what we expected from what people told us they would do. But what got really interesting was then for the anti-surveillance thing with the, that they fought for your freedom, don't give it away, essentially. What we see is that that's brought up not just the low, who we already kind of have in the bag anyway, who are like your base condition and they're going to support you. You also bring up the support for the people high in authoritarianism. So one of the takeaways, which was kind of unexpected, was that if you want to nudge people the other way in that nothing to fear, nothing to hide argument, then for the authoritarian group, you might want to look at using this argument of, they fought for your freedom, don't give it away. And again, a much lower correlation coefficient. So after all that, you might still be asking, yeah, but does it work? Right, all you've really shown me is that people click on ads, but is it persuasive? Which is a fair statement. So there is some research in this, and unfortunately it's difficult to replicate because they had these guys from Germany, and they had a sample of 8,000 citizens in Germany, and essentially this was regarding attitudes to transatlantic trade. And they took a baseline survey of people's support for it. That's kind of the zero there. And there was, so that was the baseline support, people for and against it. But then what they did is they sent a section of that demographic, if you like, those 8,000. They sent them positive information, like literature about what transatlantic trade is, and what the benefits of it are. And then they looked at the results of, whether, they reran the surveys to look at whether people were supportive or not of transatlantic trade partnership. And that increased like significantly in the weeks following having received that literature. It dropped off a bit when they then did a follow-on study some months later, but it just suggests that essentially if you want to get the message out, you have to keep going with it, because over time it's going to go back down to whatever the default baseline was. So if you're interested in persuasion, there are a number of books. O'Keefe has written a book about persuasion, but these guys are worth following because their research in this is, there's just not a lot of research about how persuasion actually works, possibly because of the ethics involved with it. So, okay, now we've shown that, yes, theoretically it's possible, and in practice it seems to have some effect, albeit small. We see, well, okay, if you've got this message out there, how easy is it to debunk propaganda? So we turn to some research by Yale professor Dan Kahan. Essentially what he did, he took his participants for his survey, and he randomly assigned them to one of four categories, A, B, C, or D. The folks in categories A and B got a question about how well skin cream works in clearing up a rash. For the people in A, they get a number grid like this, and they have to say, okay, which one? Was it people who used the skin cream were more likely to get better than those who didn't, or people who used the skin cream were more likely to get worse? And they had to choose the right number, essentially, and put you out of your misery. For this one, it was 75. And for the B group, essentially the same question, they just switched the top line round. So instead of it saying rash got better, it says rash got worse. So you've kind of got that control in there. They gave those people that question that way around. So it switches. It got worse for those people. But what Kahan did then, he gave people in groups C and D a question about gun control and crime, and that led to some interesting results, actually. So we replicated his work, and this is what I'll share because it's essentially the same kind of results. We switched the question to one about immigration because in Brexit, this whole immigration thing was one of the major contributions to the way people voted. So looking at the results for the skin cream results, what we see is that for both people who voted leave and remain, they're pretty similar at being able to interpret the numbers. But when you get to immigration decreases crime, people who voted leave are just kind of unable to see the answer, if you like, whereas people who voted remain, their performance improves. But then if you switch that round to suggest that immigration actually increases crime, then the leave performers get a boost, like a, yeah, I told you so, right? And the Remain campaigners are like, no, I don't want it, fake news. Essentially this concept was described as the most depressing brain finding ever, or if you're looking for this in like Google Scholar or what have you, it's motivated reasoning or ideologically motivated reasoning, or motivated numeracy, and there's various descriptions for it. So what we did in this study, what we wanted to do was to look at the surveillance aspect. So we again did the skin cream questions and found broadly the same sorts of results. But what we did, instead of asking a question about gun control or about immigration, we really asked a question around surveillance increases or decreases the threat of terror. So actually increased levels of surveillance would have an effect one way or the other. What we found is that for people who agree with the nothing to hide, nothing to fear argument, if they're shown numbers that suggest that surveillance actually increases the threat, i.e. it doesn't work, is that their performance in answering the question dropped. The performance also dropped a little bit for people who disagree with it. It's probably due to the complexity of the question, actually, the wording of the question. But when we flip it round, we see a similar sort of trend to what we saw in Kahan's original paper and the Brexit paper, is that people who disagree with the statement, it's their performance that drops, and the people that agree with it, they get a boost because it's like, yeah, surveillance decreases the threat, i.e. it does work, so we should use it. And this phenomenon, this motivated reasoning, it gets worse with age as well. So, people say younger voters don't know what they're voting for, but it seems that as people get older, they get more entrenched in these ideological views, and there's some possible reasons for that. So it's interesting research to follow, because if you're wanting to use facts to debunk an ad or to debunk a narrative, you're going to come up with some problems. So bringing us to the conclusions and discussion, essentially we looked at 5 things here, right? We looked at why people so divided. Authoritarianism isn't the only reason, but it plays a large factor in some of these current political discussions. What influences their views? Lots of things influence their views, but anxiety and anger certainly play a part. We know that we can target these different groups. Otherwise, people wouldn't do it, which they kind of do, and you get a bang for your buck. So what we're finding with the ads is you might go, well, we have no proof that it worked. Increase the click-through rate, so we're getting a bigger bang for our buck at the very least. Then how persuasive are they? Again, we're seeing that certain narratives, certain text, certain images have an effect, and people are, kind of researching that quite a bit. If you're looking for a video online, really recommend Dee Madigan's work. She is an advertising creative in Australia and does a great talk on propaganda. And then we find, what I just spoke about, debunking propaganda has some challenges. So one question that was asked of me as well, if both sides use this kind of tactic, don't the effects just equal out? But I think actually it kind of depends on the starting position. So you've already got momentum on one side versus the other. And as an example of that is if we were going to have a referendum on shutting down the darknet tomorrow, then the people who are saying shut down the darknet have already got home field advantage, essentially. So they can double down on that. So that means that the playing field for some of these isn't level. And by doubling down on it, is you're increasing the anxiety to bring up your the people who wouldn't ordinarily support it. Same thing with immigration, same thing with death penalty, same thing with all of these things. You could do that. It's not going to nudge it massively, but a few percentage points is probably enough in some cases. We had elections in the UK last year where people won by a handful of votes, literally won by, a few hundred votes. So in those scenarios, yeah, it can be effective. So, I mentioned the use of fear. There's been some some studies into political ads and how they motivate and persuade voters, this one by Brader in 2005. He suggests that images with smiling children, colorful images, are less likely to be effective. People are much more motivated to click on ads and look at articles if it's grainy black and white images, which is why we chose the black and white images for our study. So if you can like double down on the fear aspect with the grainy images and you get the grainy imaging stuff right, then you're going to get some ads that people are going to click on a little bit more, at least in theory. So what might we do about tackling the problem? Well, I'm not sure how many people are familiar with this lady. It is Jane Elliott. And essentially what she did this blue eyes, brown eyes experiment where she divided the classroom into children with blue eyes and children with brown eyes. And she used that to look at, raise awareness of racism essentially within the classroom without mentioning color. Eye color. And that's been pretty interesting work that she's done for decades. So the point with this is we could do something similar, but raising people's awareness of their own biases. So if you're looking at the debunking of propaganda, if you know that you've got a bias already, you might want to double check the numbers or, what have you. So there's some work that could be done about educating people on biases. It's not just about political campaigns. When people buy cars, you see the number on the screen, that's the anchor. So educating people about how they're being suckered in by their own biases, myself included, raises awareness. So it's not necessarily a bad thing and might be an effective strategy in tackling some of the stuff that we're seeing today. The other thing is numeracy. So once we get the biases sorted out, then maybe we can raise people's ability in numeracy, because it was shockingly poor in the UK. It's shockingly poor in the US as well. I don't know about Canada, actually. So we saw low levels, and that's been found in lots of different papers and research and surveys. So if you can educate people about their biases and then increase the numbers, then they're going to make better decisions. And there's been a lot of research into numeracy and healthcare choices, because people repeatedly make poor choices based on, one of the factors involved is inability to really determine the risk. So sometimes you'll hear this termed as numerical risk literacy. And the final one, the reason I left it till last, was sort of rules and regulations. It's like, yeah, you do need some rules and regulations. I think one guy at Cambridge Analytica had said, well, it's just the same as advertising toothpaste, right? But no, it's not, because actually you've got tighter controls in the UK, at least, for advertising toothpaste. You can spin a whole web of lies for a political campaign, use questionable numbers and statistics, which you just can't do advertising toothpaste. So, you can Google the Electoral Commission in the UK for that. So that kind of needs tightening up. But I think rules and regulations aren't going to do it on their own. But the transparency discussions that we're seeing right now with regards to Facebook and Twitter and whatnot, I think will be interesting to see how that kind of works out. So hopefully I've finished just about on time. And we've got a few minutes left over, so I've got some other slides. So if anybody wants to contact me, I'm Chris, Online Privacy Foundation. I'm also Suggy on Twitter. It's 5UGGY. Because 5 looks like an S, right? So because I've got like 5 minutes left over, one of the questions around sort of the differences, how do people, how does this actually happen? Because people aren't really that different to start with. So there's been research into this, and some books written about it as well. Take Alice and Bob, because we're at a security conference, and they start off with broadly similar attitudes to surveillance. And they're having a discussion. One person goes, wow, actually, I think there's something in this, nothing to hide, nothing to fear argument. And then they start maybe seeing more of those ads which resonate with them. And what happens is that one person's going to start migrating down one side of the triangle. And the other person who says, yeah, well, I've seen how, this anti-surveillance stuff is leading to innocents being arrested, erosion of privacy, and it's bad for, to society. And they start seeing that. And what happens, people who were generally fairly close start advancing down the triangle until they're like poles apart. And that's why it feels like there's this polarization in politics. So So the challenge is like how you overcome that, because essentially you've got to overcome not only people's biases, but also a cognitive dissonance where they're not going to be readily willing to admit that they were maybe wrong in the first place. In terms of targeting people based on personality, this was a graph from our study that we did in 2012 or something like that. And we found that for the top 10% of people who in the personality trait of openness, the prediction rate was 75% that really were in the top 10%. And that was back in 2012 with some pretty crude measures. Things have, advanced quite considerably, now in that. So, you can go and check out what different apps think about your personality. There's this one here called Data Selfie, which you run in a browser. Essentially, it monitors what you're doing with, Facebook, and then says, hey, I think you're, liberal, what have you. And there are, other versions of this as well. You've got IBM's. You've got the receptivity is based on the language that people use, and in the bottom you've got like it's called apply magic source. So that like looks at I have not got the slide in it, but it was like, well, we think you're fairly liberal, but we've got this question mark because you like Top Gun. And you like skiing in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and because you like Wyoming, well, it's like we're pretty sure, but these are question marks. So what I'm trying to suggest is that the ability to look at people's personality through their social media profiles has actually advanced considerably since we first started looking at it. So with that, I think that brings us to actually the end. I've probably got a couple minutes for some questions, but I'll be around, this evening if people have more. So that's it, folks.